The courtroom air smelled of old paper, floor wax, and the faint metallic tang of human desperation. For Imani Carter, it mostly smelled like survival. Each sterile breath was a down payment on another day for her sister, Nia. She sat in the translator's box, a glass-walled cage that kept her separate but perpetually on display. Her suit was a respectable but inexpensive charcoal gray, the fabric a constant scratchy reminder of her place in the hierarchy. Her hair, a crown of intricate braids, was pinned back with severe precision. Everything about her was designed to be unremarkable, to fade into the judicial woodwork, invisible. She smoothed the front of her blazer, her long, capable fingers pressing out a non-existent crease. Those hands had once typed out classified intelligence reports, decrypted coded communiques from North Korean operatives. Now, they trembled almost imperceptibly as she calculated the cost of Nia's next round of experimental gene therapy. The number had 6 digits and a weight that settled deep in her bones, a constant crushing pressure. It was the reason she was here, taking on a last-minute low-paying gig for the district court. The regular translator had called in sick, and Imani's name was at the top of the emergency list. Reliable, fluent, and always available. Always desperate. A nervous tremor ran through the courtroom staff. Frank, the balding, perpetually sweating clerk of courts, scurried over to the translator's area. "Listen up," he whispered, his voice raspy with anxiety. "The afternoon docket has been changed. We've got the preliminary hearing for Kwon Ji-han." A collective intake of breath. The name dropped into the stale air like a stone, sending ripples of fear and morbid curiosity through the room. Kwon Ji-han, son of Chairman Kwon Tae-woo of the monolithic Shinjin Group. The Shinjin Group was a hydra of legitimate businesses, shipping, construction, tech, and darker, unacknowledged tentacles that wrapped around the city's underworld. Ji-han was rumored to be the one who handled the family's less savory affairs. He was untouchable, a ghost in a bespoke suit, and now he was going to be sitting 20 feet away from them. "Prosecutor Choi Woo-jin is handling it personally," Frank added, wiping his brow with a crumpled handkerchief. "He's gunning for a big win, so no mistakes, everything by the book. Carter, you're on deck. You good with this?" Imani gave a slight deferential nod. "Yes, Mr. Henderson." Inside, she felt a familiar, cold shift. Choi Woo-jin. She knew that name too. Ambitious, ruthless, from a family of political elites. A peacock who loved the sound of his own voice. This wouldn't be a simple hearing, it would be theater. And she, the translator, would be a prop. She suppressed a flicker of memory. Her foster father, Park Jae-sung, a disgraced Busan detective, sitting at their small kitchen table years ago. The smell of his cheap soju and kimchi jjigae. He'd spread out photos of men in sharp suits, his voice a low growl. "Remember Imani ya?" he'd said, tapping a photo of a much younger Choi Woo-jin standing next to his senator father. The ones who preen the most have the most to hide. They use language like a weapon, but they don't respect it. They think it's just noise to get what they want. That's their weakness. A quiet man in the back of the gallery caught her eye for a split second. He was older, with a face like a weathered landscape, wearing a simple but impeccably tailored dark suit. He wasn't looking at the judge or the lawyers. He was watching the room itself, his gaze missing nothing. He felt familiar, like a ghost from her foster father's world. She filed the observation away. A good analyst never ignored an anomaly. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The low hum of conversation ceased, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. It was the silence of predators entering a room. 2 men, built like refrigerators in dark suits, entered first, their eyes scanning every corner. They moved with an unnerving economy of motion. Then he came. Kwon Ji-han did not walk into the courtroom. He flowed, a river of dark, contained power. He was taller than she'd expected, his body a lean, dangerous line under a suit so black it seemed to absorb the light. The fabric probably cost more than Nia's last 3 hospital stays combined. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe watch, a sliver of platinum and obsidian. Its price could buy Nia's treatment outright, with enough left over to buy the whole damn hospital. His black hair was cut with razor precision. He moved past the translator's box without a glance, his presence a cold front that dropped the temperature of the room by 10 degrees. He took his seat at the defendant's table, flanked by his legal team, and only then did he look up. his eyes last. They were the coldest things she had ever seen, black, flat, and utterly devoid of emotion. They swept the room once, assessing, dismissing. They passed over her as if she were a piece of furniture, invisible. It was exactly what she wanted. It was a lie she had perfected for survival. Prosecutor Choi Woo-jin entered from the side, a stark contrast to Jihan's quiet gravity. He was all performative energy, his suit a fashionable shade of navy, his smile aimed at the press section. He arranged his papers on the lectern with a flourish, a conductor preparing his orchestra. He radiated a smug confidence that set Imani's teeth on edge. This was his stage. The judge, a man whose weary expression suggested he'd seen it all, droned through the initial proceedings. Then Choi stood. "The prosecution calls Mr. Kim Min-seok to the stand," he announced, his voice booming with artificial authority. A nervous, middle-aged man was sworn in. He was a dock foreman from the port, a place Shinjin Group controlled. Choi began with simple questions in English, establishing the witness's role. Then he shifted. "Mr. Kim," Choi said, his tone becoming conspiratorial. He switched to Korean, a formal, textbook version. "Can you describe the events of the evening of October 12th? Imani leaned into her microphone, her voice a neutral, professional monotone. She translated his question, then the witness's hesitant reply. For 10 minutes, it was routine. A verbal tennis match, with her as the net. Choi was building a narrative of illegal shipping containers, of records being falsified on orders from on high. Jihan remained motionless, his face an impenetrable mask. He hadn't looked at Imani once. He didn't need to. He knew the language. She was there for the benefit of the court, a legal necessity he clearly disdained. Then Choi saw his opening. The witness, Mr. Kim, was growing more agitated, his answers becoming more confused. Choi's smile sharpened. It was time for the show. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, and his Korean shifted dramatically. He slipped into a thick, performative Busan Saturi, the rough, salt-of-the-earth dialect of the southern port city. It was a deliberate tactic, meant to build a false camaraderie with the witness, while simultaneously throwing the court and the translator off balance. "Ajasi," Choi began, using a familiar term for an older man that was slightly too informal for a courtroom. "Let's be honest with each other man to man. We both know how things work down at the docks. A little extra cargo, a blind eye. It's the way of the world, isn't it?" Imani's hands froze over her console. This was the weapon her father had warned her about. The casual, condescending use of dialect to assert dominance. She translated his words, but she kept her English translation flat, stripping it of the oily, manipulative tone. Choi glanced at her, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He wanted the full performance transmitted. He ramped it up, his dialect becoming thicker, his words laced with slang. He was painting a picture of Jihan as a distant, soul-bred aristocrat who wouldn't understand the gritty realities of the port, a place Choi was pretending to be an expert on. Jihan's expression didn't change, but Imani saw a muscle jump in his jaw, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the ice. Choi turned his attention fully on the witness, but his next words were aimed like a poisoned dart directly at Imani's glass box. He spoke in a rapid-fire slurry of Busan slang, a test. "And the orders came from the top, didn't they? From the prince himself. Don't worry, you can tell us. This court will protect you." Then, under his breath, but loud enough for the microphone to catch, he added, "Let's see if the Geomyun Agassi can even keep up with this. Geomyun Agassi, black girl, black miss." The words hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just the literal meaning. It was the dismissive, contemptuous tone, the casual racism, wrapped in linguistic arrogance, designed to humiliate her in a language he assumed she was barely competent in. He was showing off to Jihan, to the court, demonstrating his mastery over everyone in the room, right down to the hired help. The court stenographer's fingers paused. The judge looked vaguely confused, sensing a shift he didn't understand. Frank, the clerk, shot her a panicked look, his face pleading with her to just ignore it, to smooth it over. For a moment, the world narrowed to the glass walls of her box. The air grew thick and heavy. She could feel the stares of the jury, the press, the lawyers. But most of all, she felt the cold, analytical gaze of Kwon Jihan. He was watching her now, waiting. Humiliation was a familiar acid. She'd swallowed it down so many times it had become a part of her. She'd smiled at microaggressions, ignored condescending remarks, all for the number that haunted her sleep. Nia. Nia's laughing face, her small hand in hers, the sterile smell of the hospital, the crushing weight of the bills. 3 seconds. Her father's voice, a ghost in her ear. Dignity is the only thing they can't take unless you give it to them. 2 seconds. The image of Choi's smug, triumphant face. The casual cruelty of it. 1 second. A decision. Not today. Imani Carter sat up straighter. It was a small movement, but the effect was seismic. Her spine, which had been curved in a posture of professional deference, straightened into a rod of steel. She lifted her chin. The mask of the invisible translator fell away, and for the first time in that courtroom, the intelligence analyst looked out. She let the silence hang in the air for a beat, letting the weight of Choi's insult settle. She did not translate his last, venomous aside. Instead, she pressed the button to speak directly to the judge, her voice calm, clear, and ringing with an authority that stunned the room. Her English was impeccable, the Queen's own. "Your Honor, I must pause the translation to make a point of order for the court record." The judge blinked, startled. "Ms. Carter?" "Prosecutor Choi," she began, her voice as cold and sharp as breaking glass, "is deliberately employing a non-standard regional dialect laced with criminal world argot. His intent is not to clarify, but to intimidate the witness and, I suspect, to test the professional limits of the court's appointed translator. Furthermore, his last statement, which I have declined to translate, was a racially charged, unprofessional, and derogatory comment directed at me. A wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Whispers erupted. Choi's face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, began to crumble. He opened his mouth to protest, but Imani wasn't finished. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking directly with his. And then she switched to Korean. Not the formal, stilted Korean of the courtroom. Not the clumsy movie gangster Busan dialect he had been fumbling with. She spoke in the Korean of her foster father, the deep, guttural, authentic Satori of a man who had spent 30 years navigating the city's criminal underbelly. Her accent was flawless. Her cadence was perfect. It was the language of the docks, the back alleys, the hidden rooms where real power was brokered. Her voice was quiet, deadly. It carried across the silent room. "Ya Choi Woojin si," she said, the informal address a calculated slap. "You speak Busan Mall like a tourist who learned it from watching old gangster films in his fancy Gangnam apartment. You want to talk like you're from the streets? Then you should know that on the streets we show respect to our elders." She nodded almost imperceptibly towards the witness, Mr. Kim. "And we don't use gutter slang to insult a woman in a house of law. It shows poor breeding." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a power dynamic shattering into a million pieces. Prosecutor Choi Woo-jin was frozen, his face a ghastly shade of white. The blood had drained from it, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked as if she had physically struck him. The witness, Mr. Kim, stared at her with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The judge looked utterly bewildered, glancing between a sputtering Choi and the impossibly poised black woman in the glass box. But Imani's attention was on only one person, Kwon Ji-han. Throughout the entire exchange, he had remained perfectly still, but as her words, her real words, in her real voice, cut through the courtroom's stunned silence, he had slowly, deliberately turned his head. His gaze was no longer dismissive. The cold, flat emptiness was gone, replaced by a burning, intense focus. He wasn't looking at her like a piece of furniture anymore. He was looking at her as if he had never truly seen another person in his life. The flicker of interest she'd seen earlier had ignited into a blaze. It wasn't shock, it was recognition. He had heard her voice. Not just the words, but the cadence, the slang, the soul of the language she had just claimed as her own. And in that moment, he went utterly, profoundly silent. The impassive mask was back, but the eyes behind it were different. They were calculating, reassessing everything. The judge, finding his voice, slammed his gavel down. "Recess! 10 minutes! Counselors! In my chambers! Now!" Choi, sputtering, threw his papers down and stormed towards the judge's door. shooting Imani a look of pure venom. The spell was broken. The room erupted in a cacophony of frantic whispers. Imani switched off her microphone. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, coursed through her veins. She had just detonated a bomb in the middle of her life. The job was gone. Her career as a court translator was likely over. The financial abyss yawned before her. But as she met Quan Jihan's unblinking stare across the chaotic courtroom, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, power. As the courtroom emptied, one of Jihan's guards, the one who had entered first, approached her glass box. He didn't speak. He just inclined his head towards the exit. It was an invitation that felt like a summons. Imani gathered her purse, her hands steady now, for her, as if parting the sea. He led her for her, as if parting the sea. He led her not to the main entrance, but to a private side exit that opened onto a quiet alley, a black Audi. A8, sleek and silent as a shark, was idling at the curb. The rear door opened. Quan Jihan was inside. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. She got in. The door closed with a heavy, final-sounding thud, sealing them in a world of tinted glass and expensive leather. The car pulled away from the curb with impossible smoothness. For several long, tense minutes, he said nothing. He simply studied her. It was the most unnerving and intense scrutiny she had ever been under, more so than any DIA debriefing. "Park Jae-sung," he said finally. His voice was a low baritone, deeper than she'd expected. His English was perfect, with no discernible accent. That was his dialect, the old Busan precinct. Imani's breath caught. "You knew him." It wasn't a question. "I knew of him," Jihan corrected. "A good cop who asked too many questions about the wrong people. He was forced into retirement 20 years ago. The official reason was corruption. The real reason was Choi Woo-jin's father." The pieces clicked into place. Her foster father's quiet, simmering bitterness. His obsession with the city's corrupt elite. He hadn't just been disgraced. He had been silenced by the very family whose son had just tried to humiliate her. "Choi isn't just a prosecutor," Jihan continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "He is a tool for our rivals. This trial is not about justice. It is a corporate attack disguised as a legal proceeding. They are using him to dismantle my family's organization from the outside." He paused. He uses language he doesn't understand. A borrowed weapon. You wield it like it was forged for you." "My father taught me," she said simply. He taught you well," Jihan acknowledged. "What is your name?" "Imani Carter." "Imani Carter," he repeated, testing the sound of it. "I have a proposition for you. Choi and his backers communicate in codes, in old dialects, in layers of subtext they believe no one outside their circle can penetrate. They believe they are invisible. You have just proven they are not." He leaned forward slightly. The air in the car grew denser. "I need your ears, your mind, the skills your father gave you. I need you to listen to what they are truly saying. In exchange, your problems become my problems." Imani's throat felt tight. "I don't have problems." Jihan's gaze was relentless. "Your sister, Nia Carter, age 12, admitted to St. Jude's Pediatric for treatment of a rare autoimmune disorder. The experimental therapy, VX7, is not covered by your insurance. The outstanding balance is $384,000, and climbing." The specificity of the information hit her harder than Choi's insult. He had dismantled her life, assessed her weaknesses, and laid them bare in the space of a 10-minute recess. This was how his power worked, not with volume, but with information. Absolute crushing information. She felt a surge of defiant anger. "You had me investigated." "I had an asset evaluated," he corrected, his tone devoid of apology. "I do not make blind investments." He gestured to a sleek tablet sitting on the seat. "A wire transfer has been authorized from a Shinjin subsidiary to the hospital's endowment fund. An anonymous donation, enough to cover your sister's treatment for the next 5 years, including all associated costs." He pushed the tablet towards her. A single confirmation screen was displayed. "This is not a gift," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "It is a retainer. Your service is required. You will work for me. You will analyze every piece of communication my people intercept from Choi and his network. You will find the truth hidden beneath their noise. You will be my weapon." Imani stared at the screen. 5 years. 5 years of Nia not having to worry. 5 years of her not having to wake up with the weight of that 6-digit number on her chest. It was freedom. A gilded cage, perhaps, but freedom from the terror that had ruled her life for so long. She thought of her father, of his fury at the injustice that had broken him. She thought of Choi's smug face, the casual cruelty of his racism. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice. It was about picking up the sword her father had been forced to lay down. She looked up from the tablet, meeting Kwon Ji-han's cold, expectant gaze. "I have one condition," she said, her voice steady. A flicker of surprise in his eyes. He inclined his head. "You said you need my skills. You're right, but I'm not just a translator. I was a signals intelligence analyst for the DIA. I don't just listen. I acquire, I analyze, I strategize. I will not be your asset, Mr. Kwon. I will be your partner in this. I direct my own intelligence operations. You provide the resources, I provide the results." The silence stretched. He was assessing her again, this time on a different level. He wasn't evaluating a potential employee. He was measuring an ally, or a threat. Finally, a very small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was a chilling, predatory thing. "A retainer, Ms. Carter," he said, "is a fee paid to secure services. How you perform those services is your domain, as long as you deliver." He pressed a button on the tablet. The screen flashed, "Transfer complete." "Welcome to the Shinjin Group." The world Imani stepped into was one of quiet, lethal efficiency. She was given a suite at a luxury residence hotel owned by Shinjin, a place of polished marble, dark wood, and silent, watchful staff. Her living room was transformed into a state-of-the-art listening post, with encrypted servers and audio equipment that made her old DIA setup look like a child's toy. Ji-han's people were ghosts. They delivered files, secured locations, and disappeared without a word. Ji-han himself was a constant, unnerving presence. He didn't hover, but she could feel his attention on her work, a silent pressure to perform. Her first task was to analyze the mountain of data Ji-han's team had already collected on Choi Woo-jin. Wiretapped calls, financial statements, surveillance logs. To anyone else, it would be a chaotic mess of unrelated information. To Imani, it was a symphony of whispers. She fell back into the familiar rhythms of her old life, the world shrinking to the glow of a monitor and the sound of voices in her headphones. She listened to Choi's calls for hours, her mind mapping his speech patterns, his verbal tics, the subtle shifts in his language when he spoke to different people. To his father, he was deferential. To his underlings, he was a bully. To his broker, he was a nervous gambler, and she found the tell her father had taught her to look for. When Choi was lying or giving a coded instruction, he would tap his finger against the phone. A tiny, rhythmic click, click, click. A nervous habit that was as good as a confession. Working with Ji-han was a delicate dance. He never praised her, but he would appear in her suite with a tray of food, authentic samgyeopsal or a steaming bowl of kimchi jjigae that tasted exactly like her father used to make, and sit in silence as she laid out her findings. He absorbed information with an unnerving stillness, his only reaction a quiet, "Continue." "Choi isn't the mastermind," she told him one night, pointing to a complex diagram she'd drawn on a whiteboard. It connected shell corporations, offshore accounts, and stock trades. "He's the public face. The real play is here." She circled a series of short sells on companies connected to Shinjin's shipping division. Someone is using the publicity from your trial to drive down Shinjin's stock price. Every time Choi makes a move in court, there's a corresponding trade. It's a coordinated financial assault. "Who?" Ji-han's voice was cold steel. "The trades are routed through a series of shell companies based in the Cayman Islands," Imani explained. "But the originating server, it pings back to an IP address registered to a rival corporation, Yanghua Construction." Ji-han's face remained a mask, but his eyes hardened. Yanghua was run by the Park family, old rivals of the Kwons. "So, Choi is their puppet. He's their wrecking ball," Imani corrected. "They're paying him to create chaos, and they're profiting from it. But the evidence is all digital. circumstantial. We need something concrete. We need to get inside his office. Jihan considered this. My team can... No, Imani cut in, her voice firm. Your team are soldiers. They break down doors. This requires a ghost. Someone who can walk in the front door and be completely invisible. She looked at him. Someone like me. His jaw tightened. The idea was a risk. It's too dangerous. Danger is my field of expertise, Mr. Kwan, she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. The prosecutor's office uses a private cleaning service. I've already looked into them. Their background checks are a joke. Getting hired will be easy. This was the first time she had overruled him. He studied her for a long moment, a silent battle of wills passing between them. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. What do you need? A week later, Imani was pushing a cleaning cart through the sterile, silent halls of the prosecutor's office. Dressed in a drab blue janitor's uniform, her hair tucked under a baseball cap, she was once again invisible. She moved with practiced ease, her mind a map of security cameras and guard rotations. Her target was Choi's office. She had less than 5 minutes. Inside, the room smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. She worked quickly, her hands sure and steady. The listening device was no bigger than a thumbnail. She placed it under his desk, near the phone line, a simple piece of hardware that would feed everything directly to her servers. As she was leaving, she noticed a framed photo on his desk. It was Choi with his father and another man. She froze. The other man was the quiet, older gentleman she had seen in the courtroom gallery, the man from her father's world. She took a quick, clear photo with a micro camera hidden in a button on her uniform. The operation was a success. Back in her suite, the audio began to stream in. It was a flood of incriminating evidence. She heard Choi talking to his broker, using coded language she now understood completely. She heard him conspiring with his backers at Yanghua Construction, but then came a call that made her blood run cold. It was Choi, his voice tight with fury. She's working for him, he spat. The translator, Carter, find out everything about her. Everything. I want leverage. A sister, you say? In a hospital? See what kind of pressure the Department of Child Services can apply. An unstable guardian, a dangerous new employer. It would be a tragedy if the girl had to be moved to a state facility. The threat was a physical blow. Imani felt the air leave her lungs. They were going after Nia. She immediately called the hospital. She was about to call Jihan, but stopped herself. This was her fight. She handled the initial call from the smarmy caseworker, quoting regulations and legal statutes with the cold precision of a lawyer, stalling them, buying time. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. Plummeted. They will not touch her, he plummeted. They will not touch her, he said, his voice a deadly whisper. It was the most emotion she had ever heard from him. He made a single phone call, speaking in rapid, guttural Korean. Within the hour, the caseworker and his entire investigation vanished. 2 of Jihan's silent, imposing men were stationed permanently and discreetly outside Nia's hospital room. The threat had been neutralized, but the incident had crossed a line. This was no longer just business. It was personal. That evening, Jihan came to her suite. He didn't bring food. He brought a file. Chairman Kwan wishes to meet you, he said. The meeting took place in a traditional Korean house, a serene oasis of paper screens and manicured gardens in the heart of the bustling city. Chairman Kwan Tai-woo was the man from the courtroom gallery, the man from the photo in Choi's office. He was older than Jihan, but he possessed the same core of coiled stillness. He bowed to her, a gesture of profound respect. Ms. Carter, he said, his voice a gravelly baritone, my son tells me you were the daughter of Park Jae-sung. Imani nodded. He was my foster father. He was a friend, the chairman said, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient sadness. An honorable man destroyed by dishonorable ones. He gestured to the photo she had taken from Choi's office, which Jihan had given him. The man with the Choi's. That is Park Sung-min of Yanghua Construction. He and the elder Choi orchestrated your father's downfall. Now, they use the son to try and orchestrate mine. He looked at her, his gaze piercing. This is no longer just my family's fight. It is a matter of honor, a debt that must be paid. A few days later, the chairman was paying a visit to a private tea house in Insadong. Imani, now acting as his de facto security consultant, had reviewed the plans. She didn't like them. "There's a blind spot," she told Jihan, pointing to a blueprint of the tea house. "Here, the CCTV camera in the main room has a 10-degree blind spot near the entrance to the kitchens. A professional could exploit that." Jihan's head of security, a gruff ex-Special Forces colonel, dismissed her concerns. "It is secure. My men are the best." Imani held her ground. "The best soldiers can't see through walls. I'm telling you, it's a vulnerability." Jihan listened, his eyes moving between Imani and his security chief. "Post a man there," he ordered the chief, his voice leaving no room for argument. He was deferring to her judgment. It was a significant shift, but it wasn't enough. Imani had a bad feeling she couldn't shake. She insisted on being part of the security detail, dressed as one of the chairman's aides. As Chairman Kwan sat down for tea, she scanned the room, her analyst's mind cataloging every detail. She saw the waiter. He was too calm, his movements too precise. He didn't belong. She recognized him from a face recognition search she had run on known associates of Yanghua Construction, a former North Korean Special Forces operative, now a freelance hitman. Her blood ran cold. He was approaching the chairman, a teapot in his hands. Jihan was across the room, speaking with one of his men, his back momentarily turned. The security chief was watching the front door. No one else saw it. The waiter's hand shifted under the tray. A glint of metal. A silenced pistol. There was no time to shout. No time to warn anyone. Imani moved. She launched herself across the room, a blur of motion. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She slammed into Chairman Kwan's chair, shoving him and the heavy wooden furniture to the floor with a deafening crash. In the same motion, she pivoted. A silenced phut tore through the air, shattering a priceless porcelain vase on the wall exactly where the chairman's head had been a second before. The hitman, his face a mask of shock, tried to bring the weapon around to bear on her. She was already inside his guard. Her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist and twisting with brutal, practiced force. A sharp crack echoed in the sudden silence as his wrist broke. The gun clattered to the floor. She drove her knee into his solar plexus, and he collapsed, gasping for air. Jihan's security team swarmed, their guns drawn, but it was already over. They had been seconds too late. She had not. Jihan rushed to his father's side, helping the shaken but unharmed chairman to his feet. Then he turned and looked at Imani. She was standing over the groaning hitman, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with adrenaline. In that moment, she was not a translator, not an analyst, not an aide. She was a warrior. The respect in Jihan's eyes had been replaced by something else entirely. Awe. He saw her, all of her, and he understood that she had just saved the heart of his entire world. The debt was no longer just his to her. It was mutual. Later that night, back in the silent fortress of her suite, Jihan stood by the window, looking out at the glittering expanse of Seoul. "They tried to kill my father," he said, his voice raw. "They crossed the line." He turned to her. "I'm going to end them. I will burn Yanghua to the ground. I will tear down the Park family until nothing is left but dust." "No," Imani said, her voice quiet but firm. It was the second time she had overruled him, but this time it felt different. They were equals. That's what they want. A street war. It would give Choi the justification he needs to get an emergency warrant to seize all of Shinjin's assets. "They're goading you into destroying yourself." "Then what do you suggest?" he asked, the question laced with a frustration that bordered on fury. "We do nothing?" "I didn't say do nothing," Imani replied, a cold, hard light in her eyes. "I said we don't play their game. We play ours." She walked to her whiteboard, the one covered in names, dates, and connections. "We don't burn them to the ground. We dismantle them, piece by piece in the light, for the entire world to see. We use their own weapon, public opinion, the law, against them. But not with a clumsy club like Choi, with a scalpel." She picked up a red marker and drew a circle around a date on the calendar. The Shinjin Foundation's annual charity gala, the single most important high society event of the year. "This is our battlefield," she said, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "And I have a plan. The night of the Shinjin Foundation Gala, the air in the grand ballroom of the Lotte Hotel Tower vibrated with the power of the city's elite. It smelled of expensive perfume, French champagne, and money so old it was practically fossilized. Men in tuxedos and women in jewels that could fund small nations mingled under glittering chandeliers. It was the apex of the world that had crushed her father and tried to humiliate her. Tonight, she would bring it to its knees. Imani arrived on Quan Jihan's arm. She was not in a uniform or a drab business suit. She wore a custom-made hanbok, a modern interpretation of the traditional Korean dress. The silk was the color of a midnight sky, exquisitely embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like captured stars. Her braids were woven into an elegant upsweep, adorned with a single antique jade pin that Jihan had left for her, an unspoken symbol. She moved through the crowd with a quiet, regal grace, her posture radiating an authority that had nothing to do with inherited wealth and everything to do with earned power. She was no longer invisible. She was a queen arriving to hold court. Across the room, Prosecutor Choi Woo-jin was holding a flute of champagne, basking in the glow of his father's political connections. He was laughing, arrogant and triumphant. Then he saw her. His laughter died in his throat. The champagne flute froze halfway to his lips. He stared, his mind refusing to process the image. He saw the woman from the courtroom, the janitor from his office, but this version was impossible. She was transformed, a creature of power and elegance, standing beside his greatest enemy not as a subordinate, but as an equal. The color drained from his face for the second time in her presence. Fear, stark and cold, flickered in his eyes. Imani and Jihan moved towards him, a silent, inexorable tide. The crowd parted before them. Jihan stood a half step behind her, a silent, lethal guardian. It was her stage now. She stopped in front of a stunned Choi. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She leaned in, her voice a low, intimate whisper, and spoke in the rough Busan dialect that had started it all, the language of the streets, here, in this palace of the elite. "You have a tell, prosecutor," she murmured, her voice laced with cold pity. "A little nervous habit. When you lie, you tap your left ring finger. Click, click, click." She mimicked the sound softly. "You did it in court when you were trying to frame Jihan-si. You did it on the phone with your broker when you were shorting Shinjin stock. And you did it when you spoke to the man who put the hit on Chairman Kwon." Choi's face was a mask of horror. He started to stammer a denial, but she wasn't finished. She reached into the small silk purse that matched her handbook and pulled out a single, innocuous-looking memory chip. It was no bigger than her thumbnail. She placed it gently on the white linen of the table beside his champagne glass. It lay there, a tiny black rectangle of ruin. "Every phone call, every stock trade, every coded order," she said, her voice still a deadly quiet whisper. "The audio from the bug in your office, the server logs from your broker, the wire transfers from Yanghua Construction to your father's offshore accounts, and my personal favorite, the security footage from the garage where you met with the hitman 2 days before the assassination attempt. It's all on there. Enjoy your evening." She straightened up and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to one of Jihan's men standing by the ballroom's AV control booth, and the world ended for Choi Woo-jin. The massive screens behind the stage, which had been displaying the Foundation's logo, flickered. The murmuring of the crowd died down. In place of the logo, a bank statement appeared. Choi Woo-jin's. Arrows highlighted transactions from shell corporations tied to Yanghua Construction. Then, a stock portfolio showing the massive short positions against Shinjin. The audio began to play. Choi's voice, tinny and frantic, filled the grand ballroom, ordering his broker to sell, sell, sell. Then, the final, devastating blow. A grainy black and white video appeared. It was security footage from a parking garage. It clearly showed Choi Woo-jin handing a briefcase to the very man Imani had disarmed in the tea house. There was no sound, but none was needed. The image was an execution. A collective gasp swept the room. Choi's father stared at his son, his face a rictus of disbelief and fury. All around them, the pillars of society, their friends and allies, turned away in disgust or stared in open-mouthed shock. His career was over. His family was disgraced. His life was ruined, publicly, irrevocably. Choi lunged for Imani, his face contorted in a desperate, pathetic snarl. "You!" he screamed. "You bitch! You did this!" He never reached her. Jihan's men formed a silent, immovable wall in front of her. Choi sagged, defeated, all the performative arrogance gone, leaving only a hollowed-out shell of a man. He looked at Imani, his eyes pleading. "Please, I can pay you. Anything." Imani looked down at him, not with hatred, but with a profound, weary finality. "I understand perfectly now, prosecutor," she said, her voice carrying in the dead silence. "Some debts can't be paid with money." Federal agents, alerted by an anonymous tip from Jihan's legal team, entered the ballroom. They moved quietly, professionally. The cleanup crew arriving after the war was already won. They took a sobbing, broken Choi Woo-jin into custody. The battle was over. 6 months later, the sun streamed into a bright, airy room at a world-class pediatric research hospital in Switzerland. The air smelled of clean linen and hope. Nia was sitting up in bed, laughing as she beat Imani at a card game. The color had returned to her cheeks, the light to her eyes. The experimental therapy was working miracles. Imani watched her, a genuine, unburdened smile on her face. The crushing weight that had defined her existence for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet, solid peace. Kwon Ji-han stood by the door, watching them. He didn't intrude on their moment. He simply stood, a silent guardian. After a few minutes, he approached and handed Imani a cup of steaming yujacha citron tea, just the way she liked it. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. His phone buzzed. He answered, listening intently, his brow furrowed. He spoke in rapid Korean, discussing a complex logistics issue with a new shipping route through the Malacca Strait. He paused, then looked at Imani, a question in his eyes. She didn't miss a beat. "Tell him to divert the lead freighter to the Singapore auxiliary port," she said in flawless Korean, her voice calm and strategic. "Pay the holding fee. It's cheaper than risking a delay with the monsoon forecasts. We'll make up the time on the European leg." Jihan relayed her orders without hesitation. He wasn't asking for a translation or an opinion. He was consulting his chief strategist. Her new title was never spoken, but it was demonstrated every day. She wasn't his asset. She was his right hand, his partner. Later that week, they stood in Chairman Kwon's private study. The old man was practicing calligraphy, the brush moving with fluid grace over the rice paper. The room smelled of aged ink and sandalwood. He finished a character, Inyon, or Fate, and laid his brush down. Corruption in this city, but he lacked the corruption in this city, but he lacked the power to fight it. You, child, you have both the sight to see the truth and the strength to enforce it. He gestured to an empty carved wooden chair at the head of the massive table where he conducted his business. It was beside his own. "This is your place now, Imani-si. You have earned it." It wasn't a job offer, it wasn't a gift. It was an acknowledgement of her worth, an acceptance into the heart of the family. It was belonging. Jihan stood beside her. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He met her gaze, and in the depths of his dark, once cold eyes, she saw a silent, unbreakable vow. It was a promise of loyalty, of protection, of a shared future. It was a language more powerful than any words he could have spoken. Standing there, in the quiet heart of power, with her sister safe and her future her own, Imani Carter finally understood. She had walked through fire, not to be rescued, but to be forged. The world had tried to make her invisible, but she had forced it to see her. She had found her justice not in a courtroom, but by taking it with her own 2 hands. What would you do if the only way to save the one you loved was to become more powerful than the monsters hunting them?